Nobody expected Shedeur Sanders to walk into OTAs and completely change the Browns' quarterback conversation in one afternoon. Not the media, not the fans, not even some people inside the organization. Coming into the first official OTA session of 2026, the assumption around Cleveland felt almost settled already. Deshaun Watson had the experience, he had the contract, he had the system familiarity, and according to most national conversations, he had the inside track toward reclaiming the QB1 role under Todd Monken. That was the script. Then practice started, and suddenly, the energy around the Browns changed completely. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't look like a developmental backup quarterback trying to survive his reps. He looked comfortable, calm, aggressive, prepared. And by the end of the session, reporters standing around cross-country mortgage campus weren't talking about Watson anymore. They were talking about Shedeur. The throws, the confidence, the pocket movement, the command of the offense. Everything about the practice felt different once Sanders stepped onto the field. And honestly, what made this moment so important wasn't just that he played well. It was how he played well. Because this didn't feel like a lucky OTA performance inflated by offseason hype. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Something the Browns may not have even fully expected themselves. And if day one was any indication of where this quarterback battle is heading, Cleveland may have just witnessed the first real signs of a franchise-changing shift. Before the first snap of OTAs even happened, the national football conversation around Cleveland already felt strangely decided. Deshaun Watson was the presumed favorite. That was the narrative everywhere. The veteran quarterback, the massive guaranteed contract, the former Pro Bowler with playoff experience, the player Todd Monken supposedly connected with immediately during offseason meetings. Everything surrounding the Browns entering OTAs pointed toward Watson reclaiming control of the offense. Even most analysts discussing the quarterback room framed Shedeur Sanders as a long-term developmental project rather than a serious immediate challenger. And honestly, from a surface-level perspective, that logic made sense. Watson had experience. He had seen NFL defenses. He understood the pressure of starting football. Meanwhile, Shedeur was still entering just his second NFL offseason, while learning an entirely new offensive structure under Monken. That's not supposed to be an easy transition, especially in Cleveland, because Browns quarterback competitions carry emotional baggage unlike almost anywhere else in football. This franchise has spent decades searching desperately for stability at the position. Every quarterback hope eventually turns into pressure. Every promising camp becomes emotional. Every preseason throw gets analyzed like it determines the future of the organization. That environment usually overwhelms young quarterbacks, which is exactly why so many people assumed Watson's experience would naturally separate him early in the process. The establishment trusted Watson. The media trusted Watson. The safer prediction was Watson. And honestly, Shedeur Sanders almost felt like an afterthought in many national conversations entering OTAs. People discussed him more as an interesting long-term possibility than a genuine immediate threat to the quarterback hierarchy. Some analysts even questioned whether he would receive enough meaningful reps to truly compete. Others argued the Browns would avoid rushing him into pressure situations this early. Again, all of that sounded reasonable, until actual football started happening. Because the moment team drills began, the energy around the practice field shifted quickly. Very quickly. And suddenly, the assumptions surrounding Cleveland's quarterback room no longer looked nearly as safe as they did before practice. because Shedeur Sanders didn't look overwhelmed by the moment at all. If anything, he looked like somebody completely comfortable stepping directly into the spotlight. And the first thing everybody noticed was the tempo. The most impressive part of Shedeur Sanders' OTA performance honestly wasn't even the statistics. It was the feeling, the pace, the confidence, the command. Sometimes quarterbacks step into practice environments and you can immediately tell they're thinking too much. The footwork looks hesitant. The timing feels slightly late. The offense moves stiffly because the quarterback is still mentally translating the system instead of reacting naturally within it. That wasn't happening with Shedeur. From the first few team drill reps, the offense suddenly looked faster, cleaner, more decisive, and reporters standing around the practice field started noticing it immediately. The completion percentage alone drew attention. Multiple observers described Sanders as completing well over 90% of his throws during the session. That's absurd efficiency for a first OTA practice under a new coaching system, especially for a second-year quarterback. But honestly, the raw percentage almost undersells how impressive the performance actually looked. Because these weren't meaningless checkdowns floating harmlessly into open space during warm-ups. The throws carried authority, timing, confidence. There was rhythm inside the offense whenever Sanders stepped into the huddle. And that matters. Quarterbacks control emotional energy more than any other position in football. When the quarterback looks calm, the offense relaxes. When the quarterback looks decisive, the entire unit starts moving faster. That's exactly what seemed to happen throughout the session. Even the body language around the offense looked different. Receivers were reacting emotionally after completions. Players on the sideline became louder. The entire practice suddenly carried a different kind of electricity once Sanders started stacking successful reps together. That's the part casual viewers often underestimate about football. Great quarterback play changes the emotional temperature of everyone around it. And honestly, that's why so many people left the practice field talking about Shedeur instead of Watson. Watson still showed flashes. The arm talent remains obvious. The experience is still valuable. Nothing about one OTA session suddenly erases everything he's accomplished previously in his career. But football environments are emotional. And emotionally, the buzz around the Browns' practice facility clearly belonged to Sanders by the end of the day. Then came the throw to Dante Compiègne. That's when the entire atmosphere reportedly shifted from curiosity to genuine disbelief. Because some throws look good, and then some throws force everybody watching to stop what they're doing entirely. This was the second type. Every quarterback has certain throws that instantly change how people view them. Not statistically, emotionally. The kind of throw where reporters stop typing. Defenders react differently. Coaches pause conversations. And suddenly, everybody standing near the field realizes they may have just witnessed something special. That moment happened for Shedeur Sanders during a 7-on-7 period midway through practice. The pressure simulation had developed quickly. The pocket started collapsing. Most young quarterbacks in that situation either panic, drift backward too far, or immediately dump the ball underneath just to survive the rep safely. Not Shedeur. According to multiple reports from the session, Sanders instinctively stepped upward inside the pocket first. His eyes stayed downfield the entire time. The movement looked controlled rather than frantic. That's important. Young quarterbacks often confuse movement with pocket presence. Real pocket presence looks calm. It looks intentional. That's exactly what made this rep stand out. Because as the pressure closed in, Shedeur leaned backward at an angle where most quarterbacks lose control mechanically. His body positioning looked almost impossible for a clean throw. But instead of abandoning the play, he trusted his arm, trusted his timing, trusted the route. Then he uncorked a dart toward Dante Campion that immediately froze people on the sideline. The ball came out fast, tight spiral, perfect velocity, and somehow it dropped directly into Campion's hands in stride, despite the awkward platform. That's not a normal throw. That's the kind of throw that changes how coaches evaluate ceiling. Because arm talent matters enormously in the NFL, especially modern football. Defenses close windows faster than ever now. Quarterbacks who can create explosive completions from compromised platforms become incredibly valuable because they unlock portions of the field other quarterbacks simply cannot attack consistently. And honestly, the reactions surrounding the throw may have been even more important than the play itself. Players reacted. Defenders reacted. Even some observers reportedly just stood there shaking their heads afterward. Because there's a difference between hearing a quarterback has talent and actually seeing NFL-level creativity happen live in front of you. That throw reportedly felt different. The crazy part is that many people around practice believed the red zone play later in the session looked even more impressive. Because while the Campion throw showcased arm talent, the next play showcased something much harder to teach. Elite quarterback processing. Arm strength gets attention, but decision-making under pressure is what separates talented quarterbacks from franchise quarterbacks. That's why the red zone sequence later in practice became such a massive talking point afterward. Because according to reports from the session, the play initially looked dead. The design called for a quick slant on the right side, but the defense diagnosed it perfectly. The linebacker dropped directly into the throwing lane. The corner pressed aggressively. For a split second, the safe decision would have been obvious. Check the ball down. Reset the play. Avoid the risk. That's what most quarterbacks probably do during an OTA practice. Especially young quarterbacks trying not to make mistakes in front of a new coaching staff. Instead, Shedeur processed the coverage instantly. That's the key detail. Instantly. There was no panic, no hesitation, no visible confusion. Reports described him resetting his feet quickly, while subtly manipulating the linebacker with his eyes before attacking a tiny window developing near the back of the end zone. That's advanced quarterbacking. Because manipulating defenders with your eyes requires anticipation and confidence simultaneously. You have to understand the coverage structure before the window actually appears. Then you have to trust yourself enough to throw the ball before the opening fully develops. That's exactly what Sanders reportedly did. The pass ripped across the middle on a line. Tight window. Perfect timing. Touchdown. And honestly, this throw may have mattered more than the flashy backward-leaning completion earlier. Why? Because NFL coaches care obsessively about processing speed inside condensed red zone spaces. Anybody can complete pretty passes in open grass during off-season practices. But red zone quarterbacking becomes much more difficult because defensive spacing shrinks dramatically. Windows disappear faster. Timing becomes critical. That's why this rep reportedly drew such strong reactions. It looked like real NFL quarterback processing. Not just raw arm talent. Not just athletic improvisation. Real quarterbacking. That's the kind of moment that quietly changes coaching conversations behind closed doors. Because suddenly, the young quarterback no longer looks like a future project. He starts looking like somebody who may accelerate the timeline much faster than expected. And honestly, that's where the entire situation becomes incredibly complicated for Deshaun Watson. Because one great OTA practice does not automatically remove Watson from the picture, but it absolutely changes the emotional dynamics surrounding the competition. The difficult reality for Deshaun Watson is that every impressive Shedeur Sanders performance automatically creates more pressure around him. That's unavoidable, especially in Cleveland, because Watson doesn't just carry quarterback expectations anymore. He carries years of organizational pressure. The contract, the injuries, the inconsistency, the constant national scrutiny. Everything surrounding Watson now feels emotionally heavy for the Browns organization. And entering OTAs, the assumption was that his experience would naturally stabilize the situation. That's why Shedeur's breakout practice mattered so much emotionally. Because it introduced uncertainty back into a conversation many people believed had already started leaning toward Watson. Now, to be fair, Watson reportedly still showed flashes during the session himself. The arm talent hasn't disappeared. The physical tools remain real. And veteran quarterbacks often approach OTA practices differently than younger players fighting aggressively for attention. That's important context. One strong OTA session should never completely redefine an entire quarterback room. But football isn't purely logical. It's emotional. And emotionally, the buzz surrounding the Browns immediately shifted toward Sanders after practice ended. That creates tension, especially because Watson understands exactly what's happening. He knows how quickly NFL organizations pivot once fan excitement starts building around younger quarterbacks. He knows how dangerous momentum becomes in quarterback competitions. And honestly, the Browns know it too. Because Cleveland has spent decades trapped in quarterback instability, the second fans believe a young quarterback might finally represent hope. Emotional pressure around the organization skyrockets immediately. That's exactly what's beginning to happen now. Social media exploded after reports from practice surfaced. Fans started debating whether Sanders already looked more comfortable inside Monken's offense. Others questioned whether the offense simply moved faster with him on the field. Some supporters even started speculating about whether Watson's grip on the QB1 role may already be weaker than previously believed. Again, it's extremely early. OTAs are not regular season football. Nobody should crown quarterbacks in May. But perception matters, especially in the NFL. And right now, perception around Cleveland's quarterback room feels dramatically different than it did before the first OTA practice began. Which is exactly why Todd Monken suddenly becomes such an important figure in this entire story. Because the more people watched Sanders operate inside the offense, the more one thought kept appearing repeatedly. This system may actually be built perfectly for him. The deeper people looked at Shedeur Sanders' OTA performance, the more one thing became obvious. Todd Monken's offense may fit him almost perfectly. That's what makes this situation so fascinating. Because Monken's system thrives on quick processing, aggressive intermediate passing, timing-based rhythm concepts, and quarterbacks capable of making fast decisions under pressure. Those are all areas where Sanders reportedly looked extremely comfortable during the first OTA session. The offense moved decisively. The reads looked clean. The ball came out quickly. And perhaps most importantly, Shedeur looked confident attacking the middle of the field. That matters enormously in modern NFL offenses. Quarterbacks who hesitate inside structured passing concepts usually struggle badly in systems built around rhythm and timing. Sanders reportedly looked completely opposite of hesitant. Even during difficult throws, the operation itself appeared smooth. And honestly, that's probably why the excitement surrounding his performance escalated so quickly afterward. Because fans weren't just reacting to isolated highlights. They were reacting to fit. The offense suddenly looked coherent with him at quarterback. That's a dangerous development for the rest of the quarterback room, especially because Munkin's offenses historically maximize quarterbacks willing to attack confidently while processing quickly. Those systems reward anticipation, aggression, command, exactly the traits many people believed Sanders displayed throughout the session. That's why some observers left practice feeling like they weren't simply watching a talented young quarterback. They felt like they were watching the possible foundation of Cleveland's future offensive identity. And honestly, the leadership element matters too. Quarterback competitions are never purely physical. Players respond emotionally to leadership presence. The way quarterbacks carry themselves in the huddle matters. The pace between plays matters. Confidence matters. According to reports from practice, Sanders carried himself like somebody fully expecting to belong. Not hopping, expecting. That mentality changes locker rooms. And it changes fan bases too. Because Browns fans have spent years desperately searching for signs of genuine quarterback stability. Not temporary excitement. Not preseason hype. Real hope. And for the first time in a very long time, many supporters left an off-season practice genuinely feeling like they may have seen the beginning of something special. That emotional reaction is powerful, especially in Cleveland. Because once Browns fans emotionally attach themselves to the possibility of a franchise quarterback, momentum builds incredibly fast. That momentum is already starting. The reaction from the fan base after practice, honestly, tells you everything about how emotionally important this moment felt. Because Browns fans have seen off-season quarterback hype before. A lot of it. They've heard promises. They've watched preseason stars disappear. They've spent decades convincing themselves that the next quarterback would finally stabilize the franchise. That history creates skepticism, which is exactly why the reaction to Shedeur Sanders' OTA performance felt different. Fans weren't just excited. They sounded relieved. That's the emotional word that kept showing up online afterward. Relief. Because for the first time in a long time, supporters felt like they may have seen a quarterback capable of bringing real energy and creativity back into the offense. The dog pound immediately exploded across social media. Clips started circulating. Throw breakdowns appeared everywhere. Fans debated whether Sanders already looked like the most naturally comfortable quarterback in the room. Others started talking about leadership, swagger, confidence. And honestly, confidence matters enormously in Cleveland. This fan base responds emotionally to quarterbacks who embrace pressure rather than shrinking from it. That's part of why Baker Mayfield became so beloved initially. Browns fans want quarterbacks who look fearless, who carry themselves like the moment belongs to them. According to reports from the practice field, Sanders carried exactly that type of energy. And the excitement quickly became bigger than one OTA session. Fans started connecting this moment to the franchise's entire quarterback history. The endless searches, the failed experiments, the instability, everything. Because Cleveland supporters are exhausted emotionally. They don't just want competence anymore. They want belief. That's why every impressive throw from Sanders suddenly felt symbolic. Not just promising. Symbolic. A possible turning point. And honestly, the emotional support behind him is only going to grow stronger if he continues stacking performances throughout OTAs and minicamp. Because the NFL loves takeover stories, especially quarterback takeover stories. Young player enters competition underestimated. Veteran remains favored. Then slowly the momentum shifts until everybody watching realizes the future arrived earlier than expected. That's the storyline fans already feel beginning around Shedeur Sanders. Whether it ultimately becomes reality remains to be seen. But emotionally, the shift already feels real. And that's exactly why this OTA practice may end up being remembered as something much bigger than a normal off-season workout. At the end of the day, nobody should pretend one OTA practice guarantees anything. NFL quarterback competitions evolve slowly. Veteran experience matters. Training camp matters. Preseason games matter. Consistency matters most of all. But sometimes one practice changes the emotional direction of an entire franchise. That's what this felt like. Because entering OTAs, Shedeur Sanders was still viewed by many people as a developmental possibility. Interesting, talented, worth monitoring, but not necessarily somebody expected to immediately challenge the structure of the Browns' quarterback room. Then the football started, and suddenly the conversation changed. Now people are discussing command, timing, pocket presence, leadership. Now fans are wondering whether the Browns may have accidentally found their future much earlier than expected. That's a dramatic emotional shift in less than one afternoon. And honestly, the scary part for the rest of the quarterback room is that momentum usually grows fast once fans emotionally commit to a young quarterback. Every future throw becomes bigger. Every practice becomes content. Every preseason drive becomes a referendum on the future of the franchise. That pressure is coming now, especially because Shedeur reportedly looked comfortable embracing the spotlight instead of shrinking from it. That's critical. Quarterbacks in Cleveland must survive emotionally before they survive physically. The pressure crushes people. The attention becomes overwhelming. The expectations become exhausting. But according to everybody watching practice, Sanders looked energized by the moment instead. That's why people are already starting to speculate about the future. Could he overtake Watson before week 1? Could Monken's offense accelerate his development faster than expected? Could Cleveland finally have stumbled into the franchise quarterback this city has been searching for since returning to the league? Again, nobody knows yet. But the conversation itself has already changed dramatically. And that's what made day 1 of OTAs feel so important. Not because the competition ended, because the competition suddenly became very real. One OTA practice should not define an NFL season, but sometimes it reveals something impossible to ignore. That's exactly what happened in Berea. The Browns entered OTA believing they were beginning another quarterback competition. They may have accidentally witnessed the beginning of a quarterback takeover instead. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't just complete passes during practice. He changed the emotional energy around the entire organization. The confidence, the tempo, the explosive throws, the command inside Todd Monken's offense. Everything about the session felt different once he stepped onto the field. And now the pressure surrounding Cleveland's quarterback room feels completely transformed. Deshaun Watson still has experience. He still has talent. And this battle is far from decided. But emotionally, the momentum around the Browns suddenly belongs to Sanders. Fans can feel it. Reporters can feel it. Even the energy around the practice facility reportedly felt different by the end of the session. That's why this story is becoming so massive. Because the NFL loves moments where potential suddenly becomes believable. And for one afternoon at OTAs, Shedeur Sanders looked less like a developmental project and more like a quarterback capable of changing the future of the Cleveland Browns. The scary part for the rest of the league: this may have only been the beginning.